This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
Issue from the Prime Minister and his chief cabinet ministers today. Their message is, if you can catch us, then catch us. Otherwise, we're going on business as usual. They're the only party that's being fingered in this massive electoral fraud. It's up to the Prime Minister to say, let's find out, let's come clean. They're not doing that. They're saying, if you can catch us, if you can find evidence, then bring it forward. That's not acceptable. The New Democratic Party are not under the cloud of suspicion. It's the Prime Minister's party, and he needs to take responsibility.
How satisfied are you that Elections Canada is resourced well enough to conduct this kind of investigation?
I think when we're looking at something of this gravity, I don't think it is now enough to just deal with Elections Canada. We saw that Elections Canada attempted to get to the bottom of this massive money laundering scheme that happened under the Conservatives. The Conservatives challenged them in court. They fought this over 2 elections, and they finally had to cop a plea. Meanwhile, all the key guys who were involved seem to get off scot-free. This is a much larger conspiracy. I think this needs to be turned over to a full police investigation and a full public inquiry.
But the Prime Minister showed no inkling of doing that. So what do you think, what's going to change his mind in the days and weeks ahead?
I think what we're seeing is a complete disconnect from a Prime Minister who said that he was going to raise the ethical bar. Their only response is, if you can catch us, go ahead. That seems to me a total contempt for the democratic process. We're talking about electoral fraud here. We're talking about interfering with the Canadian right to vote. It would seem to me, if the Prime Minister was serious about setting an ethical bar in this House, he would say, I had nothing to do with this, and I will find out who did it, and we will have those people charged and put in jail. That's not the message we're hearing.
What did your party ask for at the end of QP today? You asked
we're asking all parties to bring forward all the documents that they have. I mean, we know that the Conservatives have elaborate contracts signed with many of these companies who are now implicated. It's not good enough to say, well, we just sent in stuff to Elections Canada. Elections Canada wasn't aware of the elaborate scheme that was in play. Those documents exist, those contracts exist, those scripts exist that told live callers to misinform the public. We want those documents turned over.
But Conservatives will say, oh, well, Michael Zona has quit. So how far do you think that goes to solving this whole thing?
Once again, it's a question of contempt for Canadian people. Do they really think that Canadians are going to believe that some 20-year-old kid down in Guelph engineered this massive electoral scheme? It doesn't cut it. And it's a very disturbing message when the Prime Minister says, hey, if you've got evidence, catch me. You know, that's the kind of stuff that crooks say. That's not what the Prime Minister says. The Prime Minister says, we take interference with Canadians' right to vote very seriously, and we will get to the bottom of that. We haven't heard that from this Prime Minister.
How widespread do you think this might be based on what you've seen so far?
This electoral fraud scheme looks very large scale. It's very sophisticated. A 20-year-old kid couldn't have come up with that kind of scheme. So obviously higher-ups were involved. Is this the first Watergate burglars that we've caught here? How far up the chain of command does this go? The Prime Minister, if he's going to maintain the trust of Canadians, he has to be willing to get to the bottom of it. Or we are looking at a situation where this is a party that is protecting people further and further up the food chain.
Question on C-30. I'm just wondering your thoughts on the bill as being a boon for surveillance for police or intelligence agencies.
Well, I think what we're looking at is a bill that could have been imported from Iran or China. This is a bill that will allow an elaborate amount of spying. And I was very surprised just in the House, the minister, obviously he was speaking out about these vicious YouTube attacks against him personally, which we all oppose. But he said that people who are inundating his office with complaints are in contempt of Parliament. This man seems to think that people who oppose his bill are a threat. And we see massive powers to the minister, not just the police, to the minister to create his own inspectors, those inspectors to be able to go into private businesses, those inspectors to be able to search any database or documents without a warrant. That's not acceptable in Canada, and I think the minister needs to start recognizing that he's just a servant of the Crown. He's just a servant of the people. He shouldn't be lording over the people with his intrusive spying all the way up the chain of command.
Mr. Angus, what do you make of the fact that a Liberal research or a former Liberal Research Bureau employee is behind Vikileaks?
You know, I have to say I never actually looked at Vikileaks. I find this personal attacks on Twitter disturbing enough. And I certainly don't think that any minister of the Crown should be exposed to threats or anonymous attacks as we've seen through Vikileaks. The one thing that did really disturb me, though, Minister Tave's statement in the House, was he said that people inundating his office with complaints were in contempt of him in Parliament. I think Minister Taves doesn't get it. He's being in contempt of the Canadian people. If he doesn't like the feedback of the Canadian people, well, then he shouldn't have put in such a bad bill. So I think Mr. Taves needs to step back a little bit and say, okay, it's unacceptable that we have anonymous attacks in the Twitterverse, and I don't know how you change that, but it's also quite the stretch to say Canadians who are calling my office and giving me a hard time have no business calling me.
And just with respect to how the Liberals are handling this whole issue, do you think that they need to say exactly who this employee was? They're not going to publish his name. Do you think those details are relevant?
I don't think it's relevant. I think that we've crossed a Rubicon in political life. Twitter has done that anyways. There's all kinds of anonymous. I mean, I get anonymous hate on Twitter every day from people with really silly little taglines. I don't think it's where politics should go, but it's where it's gone. I would encourage all parties to keep an eye on their staffers. Some staffers are over-enthused. I don't think this is any criminal matter, but I just think it's distasteful.